Well, good morning, everyone. Hopefully you're having a decent conference. If you attended the talk yesterday, some people attend the same talk twice, then you'll be able to see the start of this talk because I managed to forget to share my screen for the first 5 minutes. So my screen is now already being shared, my camera's on, I'm unmuted. Hopefully today will go a little bit more smoothly than yesterday's talk did at the start. I hope you're all having a good conference. My name is Tim Heron. I am a senior developer with Apteco, and I've been at Apteco for nearly 20 years. It'll be 20 years next year. This session is being recorded. I need to get it right compared to yesterday's, and it will be made available on the website after the conference is over. So if you want to revisit parts of this talk, then you can do. We've muted everyone's microphones apart from mine. Hopefully. So if you've got any questions, please submit them over the chat facility. And I've got a colleague, Andy Cook, is monitoring the questions. And if we get time at the end of the session, we're running a little bit late, but as always, but hopefully I'll be able to answer those questions. If not, then I can contact you after the session, or you can email your questions to support and I'll try and answer them in the following days. So the topic of this talk is really sort of the changes which we made to FastStats Designer over 2021. There's no big new feature in Designer this year. In previous years, we've had things such as incremental extracts and the enhanced data builder and then deltas, which are great big topics which are nice to give a presentation on, but actually only really relevant to relatively few people who are building our systems. This talk is lots of little bits and pieces. So hopefully, even though there's no sort of big bang topic to sort of pull the talk all together, you'll find something of useful note in this talk. So hopefully something for everyone. So I'm going to be going through changes we made to Designer, things such as the online help, the changes we made to the installer. I'm going to go through an example of loading JSON data using one of the ADO.NET providers, SQLite. I'm going to talk about a little known bit of data that we keep within FastStats, which is our postcode lookup file. And I'm going to talk about some new features with Designer, really around our orphan indicators, which is a new feature for Q4 2021. And then I'm also going to talk about some improvements to the FastStats service around incident counts, row filters, and deployment. So all kinds of technical topics all over the place. But hopefully I'll be able to give a good couple of demos which sort of smoothly segue everything together. So the first thing I want to talk about is that the FastStats Designer installer, the MSI file, no longer requires elevation. We've reauthored this installer to use what Microsoft called single package authoring. This is something that we do for the launcher installer anyway. But it means that when you install the MSI, you get a choice of two options. You can either install for all users, which requires elevation, so requires you to run it as an administrator on a machine. And that will copy the files into C program files, a privileged location under Windows, and install it for all users of that machine. But you can also now choose the option to install Designer just for your current user. And this will copy the Designer files into a directory which your user has access to without requiring elevation or without requiring to be an administrator on the machine. And we've done this because we see more and more systems where in order to be able to install software using an MSI, you require to get the IT team involved. And so they need to come and give you approval to install software in an elevated manner. And so by making this change to this installer, you've got the choice. You can still push it out through group policy using the all users MSI, or you can install just for your current user, install the latest version without requiring elevation, just by copying the MSI file onto the machine and running that installer to put those files in that local place. Our online help, the Designer help used to be packaged as a compiled HTML file, a CHM file built into the help menu. And that had a number of disadvantages because in order to get the latest help, you had to install the latest Designer, so you couldn't really go and view the help before you install Designer. The designer help is now on the Apteco help hub. So the designer menu just points to that. The help menu opens up a web browser. It's fully searchable, and we record the visits and searches to improve the content and searchability. So we've already seen a couple of people searching for things, and we can determine a little bit whether they're finding the results that they want, depending on the pages they then visit. And so we're going to use that analysis to improve the help files on the help hub. The other thing I'm going to go through a little bit is these .NET providers. I spoke about this a little bit last year, but we're seeing this a little bit more and more, that more of these providers, these DLLs, are being hosted on NuGet, which is a publicly accessible website which stores compiled binaries, compiled DLLs in a particular format. And so we're trying to make it easier to install multiple ADO.NET providers side by side. So we've been revising the instructions on the help pages to try and keep them up to date. All of these providers are changing all of the time, and we try and keep it up to date. But also, these providers, they quite often depend upon different DLLs, especially now a lot of them use .NET Core. They depend upon the same DLLs with the same names, but on different versions. So the provider from SQLite might depend upon the same DLL as a Snowflake provider, but they're on different versions. And so we need to have proper separation between these providers. So each provider is now placed into a separate subfolder. And I'm going to take you through a quick demonstration where I'm going to download a provider and install it into Designer, going by the help. We quite often get asked about how to load JSON data. And so I'm going to give you an example of where we use one of these ADO.NET providers for SQLite, how we can use that SQLite and the extensions available within SQLite to load JSON data. So we've got a similar kind of functionality exists for SQL Server, but within SQLite, SQLite is ADO.NET provider is a plugin to FastStats Designer. And then within SQLite, there's another plugin which is called an extension in SQLite terminology. And so we're using a plugin to a plugin, which gives us functionality to parse JSON documents. Or in this particular example, I'm going to show you how to parse a format of JSON called JSON-L, which is where we have a separate JSON document per row within a table. And then similar schemes exist for other databases. SQLite is just a very lightweight database, which I can demonstrate to you. And then finally, it is part of the first bit of the demo, which I'm going to show you, is I'm going to talk, there's this postcode lookup file that we have. So this is included and distributed as part of the FastStats Designer installer. It's copied into the program files directory of FastStats Designer, and it creates this file called ukpostcode.fspx. There is a German equivalent, a DE postcode.fspx, but this gets included in every single build that you do with FastStats Designer. And effectively, this holds the data of the longitude and latitude of every postcode. This has been stuck at an old version because basically the data feed that we had was quite difficult to work with and quite an old version. And it's used within FastStats to perform postcode lookups within expressions. So if you've used the longitude and latitude postcode expressions within FastStats, then it's using the data in this file, this binary file that we include with each build. So with the Office of National Statistics now provides a decent source of this data, and they keep that data up to date. And we will endeavour to keep this UK postcode FSPX file up to date with FastStats Designer as well. So before each release that we do, we will go and update this file. So you should automatically, if you've got, especially as this file is now about 5 years old, you'll probably find that some of your postcodes aren't matching in your various expressions. And when you get to the 2021 Q4 release with this updated file, those postcodes will then match, and you'll get the correct longitude and latitude rather than not being able to match it. And then we'll keep it up to date going forward. So let me just give you a nice smooth demo of how all this fits together. So I've got our installer, FastStats Designer installer, and this time when I run the installer, we get this extra option for our installation scope. So I can either install for all users of this machine as normal, And in that case, that requires elevation. So I get this little shield icon to say it's going to install. It's going to require administrator access or elevation to install this application. Or I can choose to install just for me, in which case it's going to install into this local app data folder, Apteco Designer. And notice that when I click install, that doesn't then require elevation. It will still create a shortcut on my start menu, so I can launch it in the more normal manner. But if I've got other users of this machine, sorry, if I've got other users of this machine, they can install their own versions of Designer. So I have a shortcut to this directory. So you can see it goes into app data local into FastStats Designer. And then when I launch Designer, we'll see that in the help menu, if I go to contents, this will then launch a web browser and take you directly to the FastStats Designer help hub. I can then go and browse to, for example, other data sources to look at my list of ADO.NET providers. And somewhere down here, I'll have a link to the SQLite ADO.NET provider, which is on NuGet. And I need two files, the SQL data.sqlite.dll and the 64-bit version of this interop.dll in order to enable these extensions. So if I go to the NuGet website, I can then download the NuGet package and save it to my desktop. This NuGet package is just a zip file, but with a different name. Instead of being .zip, it's .nupkg. But I can just open it up in 7-zip or a zip file, zip utility of my choice. I can then, in my program files directory, again, notice I don't need any kind of elevation to be able to do this because it's in one of my local folders. I can create a subfolder called providers and then a subfolder called SQLite. And then I can go and extract the files that I require. So it was the 64-bit version of this interop DLL, and it was the .NET 4.6 version of that DLL. And now this time when I run Designer, I'll have the option to look at my data providers, and you can see I've got this SQLite provider now included, and it's now in this subfolder, it's SQLite. So if you use this, instead of having to drop the providers directly into the program files directory, you create subfolders underneath the directory called providers, and Designer will go and pick up those providers from there. So if I now do a quick system build, so let's give it the imaginative name of SQLite, and I'm going to add a credential, also called SQLite, and then I'm going to choose my SQLite ADO.NET provider. Now I have a connection string pre-prepared. So this is going to point to the test.sqlite database I have sat on my local machine. And then it enables the extension of that DLL that we downloaded as well. So this is specific connection string functionality for SQLite, which enables extensions. I can test my connection, and I'm connecting to this SQLite database. If I go to my data sources and add the tables within this data source, I've got our usual 3 demonstration tables that we have. And you can see it pulls back the fields as normal for most of the tables. But in our people table, I have this single field called data, which contains JSON-L information. So this is a JSON document per record, per row. And so we want to be able to extract and parse this JSON data out of this data source. And we can use the extensions that we've loaded with SQLite to use additional functions by using this in a custom query. So I've got a pre-prepared custom query I've written down here, where you can see we're going to do a select statement of our 2 keys because they're coming through as normal database fields. And then I'm using this extension function called JSON extract, and SQL Server has something very similar, which is allowing me to extract bits and pieces of key value pairs out of this JSON data and present them to Designer as separate columns. So if I click test query here, you can see this just comes through the normal data source, even though that this data is stored in my database as JSON. So it's going to remove that data field. I'm going to add the new fields here. I'm then going to go and enable the enhanced data builder the enhanced data builder will soon become the default for new designs. I think from the 2022 releases, it will become the default. And I can then go and build the system. And it will, oh, I've missed a step out, of course. So let's go and add these tables in. And then build, extract all the data, and away it goes. So that's going to build the system, extracting the data from JSON from our SQLite database, and then build the system. Now, the big sort of functionality that we announced last year is the Delta build process. And this Delta code has been in the enhanced data builder for over a year. It's been stable. We've fixed a couple of bugs, but not found any serious issues with it. But we still have relatively few systems using it, or very few systems using it. We have got a couple. But compared to incremental extracts and compared to the enhanced data builder, we've got plenty of people using incremental extracts. We've got plenty of people using the enhanced data builder, but only sort of a couple of builds using Delta processing functionality. And really, we want to understand why not, because there's an awful lot of benefit in terms of extract speed and reduced load on your source databases by using deltas. So we've got a few ideas as to various reasons why, and we'd like you to tell us for various systems that you've got, if you find the time to sort of let us know why aren't you using deltas. And so we've got some example reasons that we think what might be going on. We know we've got plenty of people on an older version of software that doesn't currently support deltas. So we've got plenty of people who stick with the older versions of FastStats and FastStats Designer, and because they don't need to upgrade, they don't need the latest features, or they've got various corporate policies which mean they only upgrade once a year or something like that. So hopefully, as people move on to a newer version and the Delta functionality sort of trickles down to become old enough for people to install, they'll start using it. Other reasons will be that a lot of people have spent a lot of time optimizing the full extracts. And so if the extracts are taking place within the time window that they require, then there's no real reason why they should move to using deltas unless they've got pressure to start rebuild their systems more quickly. Incremental extracts probably are used a lot, and they make a huge benefit to the slowest tables, because those big transaction tables, which are append only with 1 billion records in, incremental extracts make a massive difference for those tables. And they're very simple and easy to set up. And so it might well be the case that incremental extracts give enough of a performance improvement that deltas aren't really required, or aren't really, there's not enough pressure to move to deltas. It could be that the delta way we have developed deltas is that it's hard for you to present the data in the required format. So incremental extracts are very simple. They just require this ERN so that we know how far you got up to, along with the requirement that it's append-only data. For deltas, we require URN, so we require a candidate key. We require the ERN, which could be derived from the last modified date, and we also require this delete flag, so that you deleted data, we know we need to be able to extract the fact that some of this data has been deleted. So it could be that those additional requirements don't fit your source data, or they can't be carried through your entire source data pipeline to present to designer so that you can use deltas. Deltas are inherently more risky than performing full extracts every single time. If you have a data issue and then you apply 10 deltas to it, then that data issue is going to be persisted through those 10 deltas. While if you're doing full extracts every single time, you know that you're taking an exact copy of what you previously got, and you don't have to sort of apply additional deltas to correct data. But the final thing is that we think that there's a functionality issue, there's a sticking point, in that a lot of people don't want to include orphan records in their builds. And so the enhanced data builder always includes orphan records. And it was designed from the outset to always include orphan records, because we knew that we would have to support deltas. And so when you come to support deltas, there's a possibility that a record could be reparented or de-orphaned. And so if you had bookings which you loaded into table, and then the person who made those bookings gets added to the person table, we've got to have some way of linking those two together. And if orphans have been dropped out, we wouldn't have those records to match them to that new person. And so we always had to load orphan records, and so we had this option to apply deltas to perform the join correctly. And so what we've done is for the 2021 Q4 release, we've added a little bit of on the surface of it, very simple but very powerful functionality to Designer for the enhanced data builder, which is what we call an orphan indicator variable. So this is coming in the Q4 2021 release. The enhanced data builder always load orphan records, but there's no option to exclude orphans. So this new orphan indicator is a very simple two-code selector variable automatically generated by the enhanced data builder to indicate if a record matches directly to its parent record or not. So this can be used in selections. So at the moment, trying to actually count orphan records is actually quite difficult in FastStats. You have to perform a multi-table query to be able to do this. By adding this simple selector, we can make those queries which determine orphans or not, just a simple single table query, which improves performance significantly. It's a very simple, very efficient variable. It's a two-code selector, is as efficient as a FastStats variable can get. And the big benefit of generating these variables is that they can then be used in row filters. So row filters, or what we used to call global filters, are ways of presenting different views of the system to different users of the FastStats system. So they could either be sort of have an administrator user who sees the system with orphans, or you can set up row filters for groups of users or for individual users so that they see the system without the orphans, because their selections are always ANDed with this this variable to drop the orphans out. So hopefully we can, by using these orphan indicators, we can give you the best of both worlds, where you're loading the orphans, using the enhanced data builder, using deltas, but then when it comes to your users, you can present the system with orphans or present the system without orphans to your users. So let's see how we're going to set up these orphan indicators in Designer. So this system which I've built, I've got a whole load of people and a whole load of bookings, but about 10% of my people are orphans. They don't match to a household. All of my bookings do match to a person. So I've got orphans in this table structure here. I've got orphans at the people level, but I don't have any orphans at the booking level. So I'm going to go to my define variable screen. I'm going to my people table. I'm going to right click and say add orphan indicator. And this will auto-generate this variable. Notice it's not coming from any source. I've not had to create an alias or anything like that in my data sources to create this variable. And if I double click it, you'll see that it contains just two codes. Now, we don't have an unclassified in this selector because we're generating this at data load. We know it's always going to be 0 or 1 for a matched or unmatched orphan. You can give it whatever description that you want, and you can also change the code as well. It's just a very simple single bit selector. So we can set this up for the people table, and we can set this up for the bookings table as well, which will create the same kind of thing. I can go to my folder structure and add these variables in to my system. I've got Matt's on the call, so I'm going to satisfy his OCD by dropping booking, so it's right down at the bottom down here for the folder structure, and then I'm going to build the system. So I'm extracting the data. Well, it's extracted the data. I'm not had to re-extract it. It's doing the auto discovery process. And now it's going to run through the enhanced data build to build this up. So we still have the orphan records loaded in the system. They're still present. But when I go and look at my system summary, you'll see that I have these orphan indicators. There's a little bug I noticed yesterday with this 100%. That's incorrect. So that's a percentage of unclassified. That's not right. So I've got to go and fix that. But you can see here we've got the appropriate counts where we've got 115,000 people are unmatched are orphans, and the total of these two matches are 1.1 million people. If I go to my bookings, you'll see that all of them matched directly to a person. So it means that with these orphan indicators, it's very easy now to just go and select on records which did match or didn't match in my selectors. And of course, because it's being done at the FastStats level, if you've got different data sources coming from different databases, if you wanted to generate this variable, you had to kind of do the join in advance and populate the variable. Now, because we're doing it at the FastStats level, we can do it across different tables. So you've got a table coming from Salesforce and a table coming from a local database, then this orphan indicator will still work in that particular case. So you can go and select on these particular variables. Now, as we're using or encouraging the use of row filters a bit more, we've gone back and taken a look at some of the performance implications of using row filters. So one of the issues with row filters is that if you've got a user or a group of users with a row filter applied, when they drag a variable out to use it in FastStats, then they get the list of codes and descriptions straight away, but they don't get the list of instant counts. And that's because we've got to go and calculate those instant counts because the row filter affects them. And so this kind of slows down the presentation of the variable in FastStats. And for a large table, it might take a minute or so to get those instant counts, and it makes FastStats appear unresponsive. So we've improved, we've made an improvement to the FastStats service, where during idle times, such as after deployment or something like that, before users are really using the system, we will spend some idle time pre-calculating caching filtered variable counts. So we go through all of the row filters for all of the users in the system, and we pre-calculate and cache and store into the FastStats control database the sort of instant counts for each row filter and user combination. And this can make systems that use row filters more responsive. And so hopefully that will mitigate this issue when you use row filters, that your system can appear to be a little bit slower because we've got to go and count those filtered versions of the variables. And we've also fixed a small bug. We did do a little bit of caching with row filtered instant counts before, but we had a bug where we threw that cache result away too soon, and we fixed a bug in there which will effectively does the same thing, improves instant count performance for row filters. The final little bit I want to go through is how deployment has changed over time. So we've now got quite a few options for deployment. If I look at my posted actions in deploy system, we've now got a grand total of 6 options which on this drop down. And we've added more options because we didn't want to completely change the dialog, because we want some kind of level of backwards compatibility. People have got particular options set. But one of the things that we're finding is that as people deploy more often or deploy more frequently, then we've had to make a couple of changes to our deployment mechanism to cope with those situations. So deployment still has 2 phases. We have a transfer phase, which is done via the file system or via the web service, and then we have a switch phase, which the FastStats service puts that system into place. So on the first phase, the copy the files to the service phase, we can use the file system to do this. So this doesn't require any access to the web service. It just copies files locally or onto the network share. And so we can copy the files to the shared network directory, and we do a new folder for each version, and old versions get cleaned up as they're unused. The service always just goes straight to the latest version, which is copied into that directory. I mentioned that we have this, there was a bug, which was this possibility where if the service was moving files out of the updates directory when designer was deploying, which normally never happened, then it was just a small window of a few seconds that could break the deployment and cause it not to deploy. We've now introduced this new file, this FastStats deploy lock file, which acts as a semaphore between designer and the service, so they have better communication through the file system. So that if you're deploying very frequently, there's a greater chance of a conflict when these 2 applications are accessing the directory at the same time. And we use this file to control that access, so that deployment will always work, even if they're both trying to get control of this directory. If you're in a situation where you're connecting over a VPN, so if you've got, for example, a cloud-based FastStats service and a local-based designer, it's a fairly common scenario, then quite often you might have a permanent VPN connection to your machines in the cloud. And so we can improve the efficiency by creating a compressed file of deployment and then copying that file compressed rather than copying it uncompressed. So at the end of the phase one, we've got the files copied into the updates directory, or a zip file copied into the updates directory. And the final little file which gets written down there is the system version XML, which is the trigger to tell the FastStats service all the files are there and it's ready to go. Alternatively, we have this web-based deployment. So we've got two of those 6 options are based around this web-based deployment. This is where we create a zip file and transfer it up via HTTPS, or we can just redeploy an existing compressed file over HTTPS. So one of the options before was to create a compressed file only. So, and then the second option in this web thing is to deploy existing compressed file. So what this allows you to do is to create 2 deployment post-load actions, one to create the file and one to upload it. And we've done this so that it affects our retry behavior. We had a situation where a customer had an unreliable connection up to their web server, and when it failed, we would retry the whole process, including creating the compressed file. And it took longer to create the compressed file than it did to upload it, such was the compression. And so by splitting it into 2 phases, we were able to create the compressed file, which would always work if you had enough disk space. And then the second post-load action would only retry if the transfer failed. And that meant it wouldn't go through wouldn't retry the most expensive part of the deployment phase. So it gave us a way of splitting this up. So this deployment phase requires FastStats credentials. It uploads to a temporary directory on the web service, and it still uses the job queue servers and the system jobs table to tell the FastStats service that there's something there for it to go and do. And the FastStats service downloads that compressed file from the web service, extracts it into the updates directory, and then writes down its own system version XML file to then trigger the rest of the deployment. So at the end of phase one, whether you do it for the files and the web, the service is in the same state, and it's then ready to go on to phase 2. So phase 2, we've made some changes to. This is where the service switches the new system into place. And we had this situation where when you're performing a build, if you created a build with a different license in the build compared to the service, there was a possibility that you created a system which wasn't valid for your license. And so we would deploy it, the service would switch it into place, and then when it tried to connect to it, it wouldn't be allowed to connect because it didn't have an active license. What we've done, the changes that we've made to Designer and the FastStats service with the new licensing system, is that we try and do everything as late as possible. So Designer doesn't perform any license checks at all. It just builds the system and then deploys it. And so that process typically will run overnight with no user interaction. And so the service then performs a sanity check. It tries to connect with the current active license to the system, which is in the updates directory. And if it can, then it will go ahead and perform the deploy. But if it can't, you'll get the messages to say it can't deploy the system because it's not valid with the current license. And so if the system's not valid because all the files haven't been copied or something's run out of disk space or what have you, if there's anything which is wrong with the system, it can't connect to it, then it won't deploy it. What this means is that if you're in the situation where you've built a system where your license has been exceeded for some reason, then you don't have to go back and rebuild the entire system with fewer records. You can contact us to get a temporary license or to upgrade your license with more records. And as soon as you install that into the FastStats service, the deployment will happen straight away because that sanity check will then take place. And so that means you can be up and running very quickly without having to go and perform a potentially lengthy rebuild process with a new license in order to deploy. So we've tried to create that situation where you can be up and running as quickly as possible, rather than say, oh no, you've got to go and do a full rebuild with your new license before you can then even go ahead and deploy. But it also means that your users won't be in a situation where they've got a broken system because we perform this additional sanity check before we attempt deployment. There are some details in there which I'm not going to go through, but I'm going to take a quick look at the chat window and see if there are any questions. So first one from Matt: does the postcode file also retain deleted postcodes to deal with out-of-date contact data? We just take whatever is on the ONS website. So it's always going to be the latest version of that data set. We don't do any kind of processing to it. We just take the current snapshot of postcodes. If you want something more specific, then we can point you at that ONS data set, and then you can try and build it into your system as proper variables. Or we might be able to give you the utility to produce the FSPX file from the CSV files. But that requires a bit of specialist support to be able to do that. Got another question from Matt. How much source data without a table? Oh, so this is a reason why the deltas may not be being used. Yes, I think a lot of the I think the orphan issue is one big thing for deltas, but I think the data preparation is another big thing for why deltas aren't being used. And it's fine having designer have these simple requirements at the end of the process, but I'm aware that the data feeds go right back. It's a designer is at the end of a really quite complicated pipeline, and so those modification dates and URNs have to go all the way through that pipeline. And if that pipeline can't handle deltas along every single stage, then that delta information isn't going to be available to designer. Will it be possible to add orphan flags to all transaction tables in bulk or one by one? No, you just have to right click on each one. The worst we've seen is a system with close to 100 tables, I think, more than, though quite a lot of them are lookups. So you only have to do it once. And you can choose, because some tables you'll never get orphans on. So why present an orphan indicator if it's always going to be false? I appear to have actually finished early, which I'm amazed at. So if there are any other questions, I'll be happy to take those. If not, if you want any additional help about how to use deltas or any more information on what I've been talking about today, obviously contact support. Take a look at the new designer help stuff. Because it's online, we can now put stuff up there far more quickly rather than waiting for the quarterly release cycle. Yes, I have a good rest of the conference. You get 5 minutes off. Thank you very much.